It was a night like any other at Harvard. The centuries-old walls of the mathematics department stood still under the weight of history and knowledge. Outside, the wind whispered through the ancient trees, and inside, only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of the floorboards disturbed the silence. It was 2 a.m., an hour when the world outside seemed a distant memory, and inside these prestigious halls, not a soul was expected to stir. Professor Harold Bennett, one of Harvard's most celebrated mathematicians, walked briskly through the corridors, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors. He had been home, settled into bed, when he suddenly remembered he had left crucial lecture notes in his office. Notes he needed first thing in the morning. Annoyed but determined, he returned to retrieve them. As he reached the mathematics wing, something unusual caught his attention. A soft tapping sound. Chalk against a blackboard. Harold paused. Who on earth could be here at this hour? Curious, he followed the sound, his instincts sharp from decades of navigating academic mysteries. As he turned the corner, his eyes locked on a sight that made him stop dead in his tracks. There, under the dim light of a half-functioning ceiling lamp, stood a woman. She wore a standard Harvard janitorial uniform, her curly hair tied back in a practical bun. Her name tagged read, Maya Jackson. But it wasn't the uniform that held Harold's attention. It was what she was doing. The blackboard, usually covered in preliminary formulas and class assignments, now bore a series of shockingly complex equations, differential calculus, nonlinear dynamics, and matrix transformations that would challenge even his most promising doctoral candidates. Maya was completely absorbed, her brow furrowed in concentration. She moved quickly yet deliberately, solving line after line, occasionally stepping back to assess her work before diving in again. Her hands were dusted with white chalk, and her cleaning cart sat forgotten by the door. Harold's jaw slackened. He watched, utterly mesmerized. Who was this woman? How could a janitor solve problems meant for some of the brightest mathematical minds in the world? For several long moments, he stood frozen, caught between disbelief and awe. Finally, he cleared his throat. The sound startled Maya. She spun around, eyes wide with panic. The piece of chalk slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. "I'm sorry," she blurted out, instinctively reaching for a rag to wipe the board. I was just cleaning and—" Harold raised a calming hand. No, please don't stop." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in curiosity. "What exactly are you working on?" Maya hesitated, clutching the rag to her chest like a shield. Just some problems I saw left on the board earlier. I didn't mean any harm, sir. I like math." "Like math?" Harold repeated, almost in disbelief. He glanced back at the blackboard. "This isn't elementary algebra," he said gently. "This is advanced multivariable calculus. This is extraordinary." Maya shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. I've always loved math," she admitted. "I couldn't afford college after high school, but I kept studying on my own. Libraries, old textbooks, anything I could find." Harold's heart tightened. In all his years of academia, he had never seen anything quite like this. Natural talent was rare. Passion was rarer still. But the combination of both in a place and a person where no one expected it, it was almost unheard of. "Where are you from?" he asked quietly. "South Boston," Maya said. "I work nights here, so I can help my mom with bills. During breaks, I study, just to keep my mind sharp." Harold studied her, really studied her. She wasn't just sharp. She was brilliant. "Do you realize," he said slowly, "that what you've just solved would stump many second-year PhD students?" Maya's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to respond, but then closed it, unsure if he was joking. "I'm serious," he added. "You have a gift, one that shouldn't be hidden away in empty halls at night." For a moment, a fierce hope flickered across Maya's face, but just as quickly, she squashed it, like someone who had learned not to dream too big. "I'm just a janitor, sir," she said, voice small. "No," Harold said firmly. "You're much more than that." He stepped back, glancing once more at the complex tapestry of numbers and symbols she had created. His mind was already racing ahead, plotting possibilities. What if What if this night wasn't just a fluke discovery? What if Maya Jackson could be nurtured, mentored, and given the opportunities she had been unfairly denied? In that instant, Harold Bennett made a decision, one that would not only change Maya's life, but would ripple through Harvard's halls for years to come. "This," he said, gesturing to the board, "is just the beginning." Maya blinked up at him, stunned. "You," he said, smiling warmly, "belong on the other side of this classroom, not cleaning it, but teaching in it someday." And with those simple, powerful words, Maya's world began to shift in ways she never thought possible. The unseen genius in a janitor's uniform, Maya Jackson, 32 years old, moved silently through the grand lecture halls of Harvard, the hum of the buffing machine and the faint scent of cleaning supplies her only companions. For most, it was a job that paid the bills, but for Maya, Harvard was a dream she could touch, even if she couldn't quite grasp it. For the past 3 years, Maya had worked the night shift as a janitor, cleaning classrooms and hallways while the world slept. But she did more than sweep floors and empty trash bins. Every night, after the professors and students disappeared into the darkness, Maya lingered. She would stand before the giant blackboards filled with half-erased equations, her eyes lighting up as if she were staring at masterpieces in a museum. While most custodians rushed to finish their rounds, Maya slowed down, savoring every formula, every unfinished thought left behind by the day's lectures. It wasn't just admiration, it was understanding. The numbers and symbols spoke to her in a language she had taught herself, a language she had fallen in love with long ago. Growing up in a rough, low-income neighborhood of Roxbury, just a few miles from Harvard's polished gates, Maya's world had been filled with struggle. Her mother worked 2 jobs, and her father was absent before Maya even learned to tie her shoes. But somehow, amid all the chaos, Maya had discovered a rare peace in numbers. As a little girl, she would spend hours in the public library, devouring every math book she could find. Algebra, geometry, calculus. While other kids played outside, Maya journeyed through the endless landscapes of equations and theorems. Numbers didn't judge her for being poor. Numbers didn't care that her shoes had holes, or that she sometimes came to school hungry. In math, Maya found something pure, something she could control. But life had a way of putting even the brightest dreams on hold. When Maya was only 16, her mother fell seriously ill. Bills piled up. Choices had to be made. College became a distant dream, replaced by the urgent need to survive. Maya worked minimum-wage jobs, cared for her sick mother, and helped raise her younger brother Marcus. She never stopped studying, though. Late at night, when the world was quiet and exhaustion threatened to break her spirit, she opened old textbooks, scribbled problems onto scraps of paper, and kept her mind sharp. When she finally landed a job as a janitor at Harvard, it felt, in some small way, like fate. She was close to the world she had once dreamed of entering, close enough to see it, to feel it, even if she wasn't part of it. But Maya wasn't content just to clean the lecture halls. No, she made them her secret classroom. She would study the equations left half-finished by brilliant minds, working out solutions in her notebook during her breaks. What astounded her most wasn't how complicated the problems were, but how clearly she could see the paths to solving them. While most would see a messy scrawl of Greek letters and strange symbols, Maya saw beauty, patterns, answers. And on this particular night, standing before a blackboard that looked like a battlefield of half-fought mathematical wars, Maya lost herself in the challenge. The problem was brutal, layers of multivariable calculus tied up with elements of quantum mechanics. To anyone else, it would have been incomprehensible. To Maya, it was an irresistible puzzle. Piece by piece, she unraveled it. Her mind raced ahead, her hands barely keeping up as she filled the board with calculations, corrections, solutions. In those moments, she forgot she was wearing a janitor's uniform. She forgot the late nights, the aching back, the lingering fear that she had somehow missed her chance in life. She was a mathematician, as real and brilliant as any student or professor who walked Harvard's hallowed halls. Little did Maya know, she wasn't alone that night. From the shadows of the hallway, Professor Harold Bennett, a man whose lectures filled auditoriums and whose research was cited around the world, stood watching. He had come back late to retrieve forgotten notes, but found himself frozen by the scene unfolding before him. Here was Maya Jackson, someone he had passed dozens of times without a second thought, solving a problem his top graduate students had struggled with for weeks. Line after line, she worked with a precision and creativity that took his breath away. Harold realized something then, something humbling and profound. Genius isn't always polished. It doesn't always come packaged in Ivy League sweatshirts or expensive blazers. Sometimes, true brilliance wears a janitor's uniform and works in the dead of night, far from applause and recognition. In that moment, as Maya wiped sweat from her brow and stared critically at the sprawling equations she had just conquered, Harold Bennett made a silent vow. He wouldn't let her talent go unseen any longer. What started as another lonely night on the cleaning crew was about to change Maya Jackson's life forever. And soon, the entire world would know the name of the unseen genius hidden within Harvard's very walls. A professor's dilemma: confront or ignore. Harold Bennett was not a man easily shocked. In his 35 years at Harvard, he had encountered all kinds of brilliance, young prodigies, seasoned researchers, and ambitious minds burning with dreams. Yet nothing in his distinguished career had prepared him for this moment. Standing in the dim light of the lecture hall, Harold watched the woman in the janitor's uniform work through an advanced differential equation with effortless grace. For a moment, he wondered if he was dreaming. Surely this wasn't real. Surely a janitor, here to mop floors and empty bins, wasn't solving problems that had left his best graduate students scratching their heads in frustration. Harold's first instinct was defensive. Years of academic rigor had trained him to guard the sanctity of the classroom. Without thinking, he barked, "What are you doing?" His voice cut through the stillness like a whip. The woman, Maya Jackson, according to her name tag, jumped, her body stiffening in alarm. The piece of chalk she held slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor, rolling under a nearby desk. I'm sorry, sir," Maya stammered, her voice trembling. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I didn't mean to touch anything. I was just cleaning and—" She trailed off, cheeks burning with shame. She hadn't meant to cross a line. She had only intended to look, to admire, maybe work through a few steps in her head. She never thought anyone would catch her. But Harold wasn't angry. As he stepped closer to the blackboard, something unusual flickered in his eyes. Not anger, but curiosity. He bent slightly, scanning the lines Maya had written. His trained mind traced the paths of her calculations, step by meticulous step. They were perfect. Not just correct, but elegant, beautifully simplified, precisely reasoned, as if the numbers themselves had whispered their secrets to her. Harold pointed to a particularly vicious equation near the center of the board, a nonlinear differential equation so complex it had frustrated his entire graduate seminar for weeks. "Did you solve this?" he asked, his voice quieter now, tinged with disbelief. Maya swallowed hard. Every instinct told her to lie, to deny it, to escape this confrontation with her dignity intact. But something in Harold's tone, an odd gentleness, made her tell the truth. I think so," she whispered, nodding timidly. For a long moment, Harold said nothing. The heavy silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant ticking of an old wall clock. Inside, Harold was grappling with a powerful dilemma. He could walk away, pretend he hadn't seen anything. After all, what could he possibly do? Harvard wasn't exactly known for plucking janitors off the night shift and enrolling them as students. The system wasn't built for people like Maya. But another voice, louder and more insistent, roared in his mind. "This woman is a once-in-a-lifetime mind. How could you turn your back on that?" Harold had spent his life chasing brilliance. He had traveled the world giving lectures, publishing papers, advising governments. Yet standing here, in an empty room in the dead of night, he realized that real genius didn't always come neatly packaged. Sometimes it showed up in worn sneakers and a janitor's uniform, with hands still dusted from cleaning supplies. He faced a choice: protect the status quo, or take a chance on someone who had never been given one. Harold turned to Maya, who stood frozen, waiting for judgment to fall. "Where did you learn to do this?" he asked softly. Maya hesitated. "Library books, mostly," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Old textbooks. Whatever I could find online for free." Harold blinked. No formal education. No mentors. No tutors. Just sheer, raw determination and self-discipline. "Do you like mathematics?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Maya's eyes lit up for a brief second before she lowered her gaze again, afraid of showing too much. "I love it," she admitted. "I always have." Harold smiled, really smiled, for the first time that night. He had seen passion before. He had seen ambition. But rarely had he seen someone who loved math for the pure, unpolished joy of it. "Tell me, Maya," he said, folding his arms thoughtfully. "Have you ever considered going to college?" Maya let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Once. A long time ago," she said. "But life happened. My mom got sick. My little brother needed taking care of. College wasn't an option. It was never an option." Harold felt a pang in his chest. So much wasted potential. So many invisible barriers, built higher and higher, until dreams like Maya's couldn't even see the light anymore. But tonight, Harold decided, he would tear down at least one of those walls. "I'm going to make some calls," he said firmly. "We're going to find a way to get you into classes. Officially. You have a mind that deserves to be here, Maya, not cleaning up after it." Maya stared at him, wide-eyed, unable to process what she was hearing. Was this real? Could it be real? "But I'm just," she began. Harold cut her off gently. "You're not just anything," he said. "You're a mathematician, one of the finest I've ever seen." And in that moment, as the clock struck 2:30 a.m., a new future quietly unfolded in the quiet halls of Harvard, one where Maya Jackson's genius would no longer be hidden in the shadows. It would shine for the world to see. The first step, a late-night conversation. The night air outside was crisp and silent, but inside the lecture hall, an unexpected connection was forming, one that neither Harold Bennett nor Maya Jackson could have ever predicted. Instead of raising his voice or calling security, as Maya had feared, Harold did something entirely different. He walked across the room, picked up a chair, and pulled it close to where Maya was standing. Then he sat down, his body language open, his eyes steady. "Tell me about yourself," he said gently, his voice stripped of authority and full of something that sounded almost like respect. Maya froze. She clutched the rag she'd been using to wipe down desks, unsure whether she should speak. She had spent her entire life keeping her head down, staying invisible in places like this. Speaking her truth here, in front of someone like him, felt dangerous. But something in Harold's tone told her she could trust him, if only for this moment. She sat down slowly, the chair squeaking slightly against the polished floor. Her hands twisted nervously in her lap. "I've always loved math," she began quietly, her voice so soft it almost disappeared into the vast room. "Ever since I was little. I guess numbers made sense when nothing else did." Harold leaned in, listening intently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her. Encouraged by his patience, Maya continued. She spoke of her childhood in Roxbury, how their tiny apartment had barely enough room for her mother, and her younger brother Marcus, how bills were paid late, how dinner sometimes meant just a can of soup split 3 ways. She explained how she found refuge in the public library after school, drawn to the math section like a magnet. While other kids lost themselves in cartoons or video games, Maya dove into dusty textbooks meant for college students. She didn't understand everything at first, but she loved the challenge. The more difficult the material, the harder she fought to grasp it. She told Harold about the day her world changed, the day her mother collapsed at work from sheer exhaustion. Maya was just 16. She quit school to care for her mother full-time, picking up jobs wherever she could. Education became a luxury she simply couldn't afford. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them away. She wasn't here to ask for pity. She had survived. That was enough. "I never stopped studying, though," she said fiercely. "I bought old textbooks from thrift stores, watched free lectures online when I had internet. I'd copy problems onto napkins if I had to. I just couldn't let it go." Harold nodded, his throat tightening. It wasn't just intelligence Maya possessed. It was an unbreakable spirit, a fierce hunger to learn that no amount of hardship could extinguish. "And now?" he asked gently. Maya shrugged. "I clean classrooms. I look at the boards when no one's around. Sometimes, if the problems are still up there, I try to solve them." She gave a small, almost apologetic laugh. "It's stupid, I guess." "No," Harold said immediately, his voice firm. "It's not stupid at all." He stood up and began to pace slowly, thinking, weighing the possibilities swirling in his mind. This wasn't just an impressive story. It wasn't just heartwarming. This was talent, raw, untrained genius, sitting right in front of him. How many Maya Jacksons had the world lost simply because no one had ever bothered to notice them? Because life got in the way? Because dreams were too expensive to chase? Harold couldn't fix every injustice in the world, but he could do something about this one. Right here, right now. He turned back to Maya, who was watching him with cautious hope, as if afraid to believe anything good could come from this night. "I want you to meet me here tomorrow evening," Harold said, his voice filled with purpose. Maya's eyebrows lifted in confusion. "Tomorrow?" "Yes," Harold confirmed. "Bring a notebook. Bring a pencil. I want to teach you." Maya stared at him, stunned into silence. Teach her? A Harvard professor offering to teach a janitor math? It sounded impossible, like something out of a story, not real life. "Why?" she whispered, almost afraid to say it out loud. Harold gave a small smile, one filled with both kindness and conviction. "Because talent like yours doesn't come along every day. And because the world needs more minds like yours solving its problems, not cleaning up after them." Maya's heart thundered in her chest. She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being screamed for her to say yes. But still doubts crept in. What if she wasn't good enough? What if this was some kind of mistake? But Harold seemed to sense her hesitation. He added, "You belong here, Maya. Maybe no one ever told you that before. But you do." It was the first time anyone had ever said those words to her. For the first time in years, Maya allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story wasn't over yet. Maybe it was just beginning. She nodded a slow, trembling nod. "I'll be here," she said, her voice gaining strength. Harold smiled again, wider this time. "Good. We'll start with the basics. Then we'll see how far you can go." As Maya stood up and gathered her cleaning supplies, something had shifted inside her. The air felt different. The night no longer seemed so heavy. By the time she left the lecture hall, the first hints of dawn were brushing the horizon. And with it, the first real glimmer of hope Maya Jackson had felt in a very, very long time. Tomorrow, her life would take its first real step toward a destiny she never thought she could claim. And this time, she wouldn't walk alone. A secret mentorship begins the following evening. As the clock struck 7 p.m., Maya stood outside the same lecture hall, her heart pounding in her chest. She clutched a cheap spiral notebook to her chest, along with a pen she had borrowed from the front office. Her hands were sweaty, and every part of her wanted to turn around, to convince herself that she didn't belong here. That last night had been a dream, but something stronger rooted her to the spot. Hope. For the first time in years, hope was louder than fear. She pushed open the heavy door. Inside, Harold Bennett was already waiting for her, a small but encouraging smile on his face. On a nearby desk, he had stacked a tower of textbooks, some old, some new, covering topics from basic calculus to advanced theoretical physics. Beside the books sat a fresh, unopened notebook and a set of pens and pencils, all neatly laid out just for her. "You came," Harold said warmly, rising from his seat. Maya nodded shyly, stepping further into the room. "I wasn't sure if you would," he added, a playful glint in his eye. "But I'm glad you did." He picked up the notebook and handed it to her. The simple gesture almost made Maya tear up. No one had ever invested in her education like this. Not a teacher, not a counselor, not anyone. Harold gestured for her to sit. "Let's see how far your gift can take you," he said, his voice full of something Maya wasn't used to hearing, belief. And so, their secret mentorship began. At first, the lessons were simple. Harold needed to gauge where Maya stood academically, so he started with the foundations, algebra, basic calculus, probability theory. To his astonishment, she mastered everything almost immediately. Equations that took most students hours to learn, Maya picked up within minutes. She didn't just understand the steps, She understood the why behind them. She could see the patterns, the beauty hidden within the numbers. As the weeks passed, Harold quickly moved into higher-level material: differential equations, linear algebra, abstract topology. Concepts that left even bright undergraduates bewildered seemed to bloom naturally under Maya's touch. Each night after her janitorial shift, Maya would slip quietly into the lecture hall. She would trade her mop and bucket for a chalkboard and textbook. Under Harold's patient guidance, she learned to speak the language of the universe, one equation at a time. And she was hungry for more. Harold watched in awe as Maya's confidence blossomed. She no longer hesitated to pick up a piece of chalk. She no longer flinched when presented with unfamiliar problems. Instead, she attacked each new challenge with fierce determination, her brow furrowed in focus, her hands moving swiftly across the board. The quiet humility she carried remained, but a spark had ignited inside her, a spark that Harold had seen in only the greatest minds he had ever encountered. Their mentorship remained a closely guarded secret. Harold knew the walls of academia could be as rigid as stone. If anyone found out that a janitor was receiving private tutoring, there would be questions, skepticism, even anger. Some would say he was wasting his time. Others would say Maya didn't belong. But Harold didn't care. Every night, behind those closed doors, a revolution was quietly unfolding. Some nights, their lessons would stretch late into the early morning hours, the two of them so engrossed in discussions about number theory or quantum mechanics that they lost track of time. Maya soaked in knowledge like a sponge, scribbling notes furiously, asking insightful questions, challenging Harold in ways that left him both stunned and exhilarated. This, Harold thought often, watching Maya work through complex theorems, is what education is supposed to be. Not privilege, not entitlement, but passion. Pure, unstoppable passion. As her confidence grew, so did her dreams. Maya started daring to ask bigger questions. She wanted to understand the unsolved mysteries of mathematics. She wanted to explore the theoretical limits of the universe. She wanted to create, not just follow. Harold encouraged her every step of the way. "You don't have to have a formal degree to be a mathematician," he told her one night as she puzzled over a complex topology proof. "A degree is just paper. What you have, what's in here." He tapped her forehead lightly. "That's the real thing." And Maya believed him. Slowly, but surely, she began to believe in herself. Outside the classroom, Maya's life remained challenging. She still worked long hours scrubbing floors and emptying trash cans. She still went home to a tiny apartment shared with her brother, still worried about bills and groceries. But inside the lecture hall, she was someone else entirely. Inside those four walls, she was not a janitor. She was a scholar, a mathematician, a future waiting to be realized. Harold kept detailed notes of their lessons, quietly building a portfolio of Maya's work, proof she had written, problems she had solved, even original ideas she was starting to develop. He had bigger plans. He wasn't just going to teach her. He was going to help her be seen. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The road ahead was filled with obstacles. But Harold had made up his mind. Maya's light was too bright to stay hidden forever. It was only a matter of time before the rest of the world saw it too. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same. Challenges and doubts creeping for weeks, Maya had been soaring. Each night she walked into that lecture hall, she felt a little taller, a little braver, as if she were finally stepping into the person she was always meant to be. But even the brightest stars have shadows. It started with a small mistake, just a missed step in a complicated linear algebra proof. Harmless, really. Something even seasoned students did all the time. But for Maya, it felt like the ground beneath her feet crumbled. She stared at the error on the chalkboard, her heart pounding, shame washing over her like a tidal wave. "I'm not good enough," she muttered, backing away from the board. Harold, who had been watching quietly from a chair in the corner, stood up immediately. "Maya," he said firmly, "this doesn't define you. Mistakes are part of learning. They're part of every great journey." But Maya shook her head, biting her lip so hard it hurt. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I'm not supposed to be here. I'm just pretending. One mistake, and everyone will see it." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she quickly turned away, embarrassed. Harold crossed the room and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are not pretending," he said, his voice steady. "You belong here as much as anyone, maybe even more." But the doubts clung to Maya like vines, tightening with every small misstep. Every time a proof took her longer than she thought it should. Every time she second-guessed an answer. Every time she remembered that outside these walls, she was still just the janitor. It wasn't just her own mind she was fighting. The world outside the lecture hall was whispering too. Word had started to spread among Harvard's faculty. At first, it was just murmurs. Idle gossip passed over coffee cups and department meetings. "Did you hear Bennett's working with the janitor? He's lost his mind. Maybe it's some charity project, a way to ease his conscience. Poor Harold. He used to be brilliant." The whispers grew louder with each passing week. One afternoon, Harold bumped into Professor Whitman, an old colleague, in the hallway. Whitman gave a chuckle that dripped with condescension. "I hear you've taken on a unique pupil," he said, smirking. Harold kept his voice calm. "She's extraordinary." Whitman scoffed openly. "She's not even a student. What's next? Are we handing out PhDs to the janitorial staff now?" The word stung, not because Harold doubted Maya's brilliance, but because he knew how stubborn, how elitist this world could be. No matter how smart Maya was, there would be those who refused to see it because of her background, her job, the color of her skin. But Harold also knew something they didn't. Genius doesn't come with a pedigree. It doesn't wear a tailored suit or flash an Ivy League diploma. It can come hidden in work boots, carrying a mop bucket, solving equations at 2 a.m. when no one's watching. And Harold would be damned if he let their narrow minds snuff out her light. Still, the pressure weighed on him. Administrators began casually asking questions about why Harold spent so much time on campus after hours. Some of his own students whispered behind his back. Even friends he'd known for decades looked at him like he was a man who had lost touch with reality. More than once, Harold sat in his office long after midnight, staring at Maya's notes, questioning whether he was doing the right thing. Was he setting her up for heartbreak? Was the world too cruel, too rigid, too unwilling to accept someone like Maya? But every time doubt crept into his mind, he remembered the way Maya's eyes lit up when she finally cracked a tough proof. He remembered the thrill in her voice when she made a breakthrough in quantum mechanics that even he hadn't anticipated. And he remembered something else, too, a promise he had made to himself years ago, to use his position not just to hoard knowledge, but to lift others up whenever he could. Harold wasn't about to break that promise now. Meanwhile, Maya struggled with her own battles. No matter how many problems she solved or how much praise Harold gave her, a tiny voice inside her kept whispering, "You don't belong here. You're a fraud. They'll never accept you." Some nights, she cried alone in her tiny apartment, exhausted by the double life she was leading. During the day, she was invisible, a cleaner nobody looked twice at. At night, she was a mathematician chasing dreams she barely dared to believe in. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. And yet, she kept showing up. Every evening, no matter how tired or broken she felt, Maya returned to the lecture hall. Because deep down, beneath the fear and the doubt, there was a stubborn ember burning inside her, a voice louder than her fears that whispered, "You are more than what they see. You are more than your circumstances. You are meant for something greater." Harold saw that fire. He nurtured it carefully, refusing to let it die. And though the world outside the lecture hall doubted them both, inside those walls, a revolution was still unfolding. One lesson, one equation, one act of defiance at a time. Maya wasn't just learning mathematics. She was learning how to believe in herself. And that would prove to be the most powerful equation of all. Meet Maya Thompson by day. Maya Thompson was invisible. In a crisp navy blue janitor's uniform, she pushed her mop and cleaning cart through the grand, marbled halls of Harvard University. Students brushed past her without so much as a glance. Professors nodded politely, if they acknowledged her at all. To them, Maya was just another worker, someone who emptied trash cans, polished floors, and scrubbed chalkboards clean after the real work had been done. But Maya Thompson was anything but ordinary. Underneath that uniform was a mind sharper than most of the Ivy League students rushing to make their 8 a.m. lectures. Underneath the tired eyes and calloused hands was a woman whose dreams had never truly died, only been buried under the weight of life's cruel realities. Maya hadn't always imagined herself cleaning classrooms. No, once upon a time, she dreamed of standing in front of those blackboards, teaching, discovering, solving. As a teenager growing up in the rough neighborhoods of South Boston, math had been her sanctuary. When the world outside her window felt dangerous and unpredictable, numbers gave her structure, beauty, certainty. While other kids ran the streets, Maya sat cross-legged in the corner of the public library, poring over old math textbooks, solving problems for fun, while her friends groaned over their homework. Her teachers noticed. They said she was gifted. A scholarship was whispered about. For the first time, it seemed like a future beyond poverty was within reach. But life has a cruel way of throwing roadblocks into even the brightest paths. Maya's mother fell ill when Maya was just 16. Bills piled up. Eviction notices came and went like seasons. Maya picked up 2 part-time jobs to keep the lights on and food on the table. College applications gathered dust on the kitchen counter while she scrubbed dishes and cleaned motel rooms. By the time she turned 18, the idea of becoming a mathematician felt like a silly childhood fantasy. Dreams didn't pay hospital bills. Dreams didn't feed little brothers. Survival did. Fast forward 20 years, and Maya found herself walking the hallowed grounds of Harvard. Not as a student or professor, but as a janitor working the night shift. It was a job she took without bitterness. It paid better than most, offered good health insurance for her 2 sons, and quietly, secretly, gave her something more: access. Late at night, when the grand lecture halls emptied out and the libraries locked their doors, Maya remained. The rooms, the books, the blackboards, they all belonged to her, if only for a few stolen hours. Every evening after her shift officially ended, Maya would wander into an empty classroom. She'd gather the scraps students left behind: forgotten textbooks, crumpled worksheets, complex equations half erased on chalkboards. She would set up a chair, pull out a stub of chalk from her pocket, and begin solving problems, reading theories, doodling proofs. No grades, no deadlines, just pure, unfiltered love for the subject that once promised her the world. Most nights, nobody saw her. Most nights, Maya was just another ghost in the building. But she didn't mind. In those quiet moments, she felt alive. She wasn't Maya the janitor. She was Maya the mathematician, the woman she might have been if life had been just a little kinder. Of course, there was always a risk. If someone caught her, she could lose her job. Playing around on school property wasn't exactly part of her contract. But Maya had decided a long time ago that some risks were worth it. She needed this. This was her air, her water, her fire. Still, Maya kept her secret tightly guarded. Her sons, Malik and Jordan, knew she liked math, but even they didn't know the full extent of their mother's midnight escapades. She didn't want pity. She didn't want admiration. She just wanted a few hours where she could be herself. And then came that fateful night. The night Professor Jonathan Hayes, a man whose name was known across continents for his groundbreaking work in differential equations, happened to forget his laptop in his office. The night he happened to hear the faint scratching of chalk in an otherwise silent hallway. The night he stumbled upon a janitor, working through one of the most complex problems he had left on the board, a problem his own graduate students had been wrestling with for weeks. The night Maya's secret world collided with reality. For a brief moment, when she realized she was being watched, Maya felt the walls of her secret sanctuary crumbling around her. She braced herself for anger, for lectures about boundaries and rules, for termination papers. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared to dream. The world had been sleeping on Amira Thompson for far too long. Now it was about to wake up. Stepping into the unknown, Amira Thompson had never been more terrified. Standing just outside room 207 of Harvard's mathematics building, she wiped her sweaty palms on her janitor's uniform, because that's what she still wore. No fancy blazers or pressed slacks like the students inside. Just her dark blue workwear and a heart hammering against her ribs like it wanted to escape. Inside, some of the brightest young minds in the country sat clustered around oak tables, their laptops open, their conversation a rapid-fire blur of technical jargon Maya barely understood. These weren't just students. These were the top of the top, future Nobel laureates, future CEOs, future world changers. And here she was, a janitor, a mother, a woman who hadn't even finished college. She almost turned around, almost fled back to the safety of her mop and bucket. What am I doing here? She thought, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. But then she remembered Professor Hayes' words from the night before. You have something they don't, he'd said. You see things differently. You solve problems in a way nobody else can. That's your power. Maya closed her eyes for a second, drew in a shaky breath, and pushed open the door. The room fell silent as soon as she walked in. Heads turned, eyebrows lifted. Some students looked confused. Others smirked. Maya could hear their thoughts, even if they didn't say them out loud. Is she lost? Is she here to clean? Why is she carrying a notebook instead of cleaning supplies? Her stomach twisted, but she held her head high. Professor Hayes caught her eye from the front of the room and gave her a small, encouraging nod. Maya, come in. Take a seat, he said warmly, as if she belonged there, as if her presence wasn't causing a minor uproar among Harvard's elite. Maya chose a seat near the back, slipping into the chair as quietly as she could. She kept her gaze down, trying to make herself invisible. The seminar began. Professor Hayes launched into a complex discussion on nonlinear dynamics, throwing equations onto the board faster than most people could blink. Maya's head spun at first. The terms, the shorthand, the references to theorems she'd never formally studied. It was overwhelming. The students were quick, confident, fluent in the language of academia. Maya scribbled in her notebook furiously, feeling like she was drowning in a sea of brilliance. Whispers floated around her. Snickers. One student, a tall guy with designer glasses, leaned toward another and muttered, "Guess Harvard's letting in charity cases now." Maya's cheeks burned. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. But Professor Hayes must have sensed the room's energy shift. He capped his marker and turned around, scanning the room. "All right," he said. "Let's put all this theory to the test." He wrote a massive problem on the board, a brutal, multi-step equation even Maya could tell was no joke. He turned to the class. "Who wants to try?" The room went quiet. Students glanced at each other, uncertain. Nobody moved. Then Hayes smiled, slow and deliberate. "Maya," he said, "would you give it a shot?" Maya's blood froze. Every eye in the room was suddenly glued to her. The janitor, the outsider. Her first instinct was to shake her head, to shrink back and disappear. But then, somewhere deep inside her, something snapped. "You love this," a voice whispered. "You can do this. Show them who you are." Maya stood up on trembling legs. Her sneakers squeaked embarrassingly loud as she walked to the board. She picked up the chalk, her hand shaking so badly she thought she might drop it. The first few lines came slowly, carefully. She double-checked each step before moving on, conscious of the dozens of eyes boring into her back. But as she worked, something strange happened. The fear started to fade. The numbers danced for her. The problem unfolded like a story she already knew the ending to. Maya's movements grew more confident, her strokes bolder. She saw patterns the others hadn't, shortcuts that simplified entire sections of the equation. When she finished, she set the chalk down and stepped aside, heart hammering. The room was dead silent. Professor Hayes walked up to the board, hands behind his back. He studied her work carefully, checking each line. Then he turned to the class. "Well," he said with a sly smile, "it seems Miss Thompson just solved in 15 minutes what none of you even dared to attempt." Maya blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. Around the room, jaws dropped. A few students exchanged stunned looks. Others, more competitive types, looked downright angry. One young woman in the front row, the same one who had been whispering earlier, actually clapped, just once, before awkwardly lowering her hands. For the first time that night, Maya allowed herself a small smile. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was relief. Proof. Proof that she wasn't crazy for believing she had something special inside her, even if the world had told her otherwise. Professor Hayes caught her eye and gave her a little nod of approval. In that moment, Maya knew. She might not have come through the front door like everyone else. She might not have a fancy pedigree or a diploma yet, but she belonged here, and she was just getting started. The silent genius at work. It was 2 a.m., and the grand halls of Harvard University were steeped in silence. The ancient, hallowed walls that usually hummed with intellectual debate were now eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional creak of old wood. Most students were asleep. Professors were long gone. Only the night janitorial staff wandered the labyrinthine corridors, cleaning up the traces of another long academic day. In a quiet classroom tucked away on the 3rd floor, a flickering overhead light cast a dim halo over a whiteboard. There, completely absorbed, was Amira Thompson. She wasn't a student. She wasn't a professor. She was a janitor, dressed in her worn uniform, her cleaning cart parked by the door. And yet, here she was, marker in hand, scrawling complex differential equations across the board with a fierce intensity, as if solving these problems was as vital to her as breathing. She paused now and then, muttering under her breath, eyes sharp with concentration. To any outsider, it would have seemed surreal, a scene that defied everything Harvard's polished image suggested. A chance encounter down the hallway. Professor William Carter, one of Harvard's most revered mathematics scholars, hurried back toward his office. He had forgotten some important papers he needed for a conference. As he walked briskly past the lecture hall, movement caught his eye. He stopped. Through the small glass window on the door, he saw her, Maya, in her janitor's uniform, solving an advanced equation. His first thought was confusion. Was she copying something? Playing around? But when he leaned closer and watched her for a moment, realization struck him hard. She wasn't copying. She wasn't playing. She was thinking, deeply and critically, solving problems that would stump most of his students. Every gesture, every pause, every correction, this was real, raw mathematical talent unfolding before his very eyes. Suspicion and curiosity. Carter didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was a fluke. Maybe she had memorized a solution. Yet the way she hesitated, corrected herself, and restructured her approach told him otherwise. He watched in stunned silence as Maya caught a mistake halfway through a long derivation and calmly, confidently rewrote the entire section. The gears in her mind were clearly spinning faster than most of his students. This wasn't mimicry. This was genius in motion. Confrontation in the hallway, unable to contain his curiosity. Carter pushed open the door. "Excuse me," he called. Startled, Maya jumped back, dropping the marker with a loud clatter. She looked horrified, rushing to wipe the board clean as if she'd been caught committing a crime. "I'm sorry. I was just cleaning. But Carter raised a hand, stopping her. His voice was gentle but firm. "No need to apologize," he said. "Where did you learn to do that?" Maya froze, unsure if she was about to lose her job. Her voice trembled when she replied, I just taught myself. I love math. I read textbooks during my breaks." Carter's heart twisted. This woman standing before him wasn't trespassing. She was chasing a dream no one had given her permission to have. The hidden struggles over steaming cups of cheap coffee in the deserted cafeteria. Maya told him everything. Growing up in a struggling neighborhood in Boston, she had fallen in love with numbers at an early age. Math had been her refuge, a world where poverty, crime, and chaos couldn't reach her. She had dreams once, big dreams of college, degrees, a life built around numbers. But life had other plans. Her mother fell ill. Bills piled up. Dreams took a backseat to survival. Maya dropped out of college and took the first job she could find, scrubbing the very floors where she once imagined she'd be giving lectures. But even when the world had stopped believing in her, she never stopped believing in herself. "I never stopped learning," Maya said, her eyes shining. A life-altering offer. Professor Carter sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "You don't belong pushing a mop," he finally said. "You belong standing in front of a blackboard." The next day, Carter went to work. He pulled strings. He called in favors. He sat down with the admissions board and proposed something unheard of, granting Maya a full scholarship based solely on her demonstrable talent. No SAT scores, no traditional application, just raw brilliance. The test that shocked Harvard, the admissions board was skeptical. They demanded proof. So Carter set up a test, an intense, supervised examination filled with problems from graduate-level coursework. Professors gathered behind the glass to watch. Maya entered the room, a simple pen in hand. No fancy calculators, no fancy degrees. In 2 hours, she not only solved every problem, she even caught an error in one of Carter's own published papers, a mistake that had gone unnoticed for years. The room erupted in disbelief. The professors, once skeptical, were now speechless. Maya didn't just belong at Harvard. She outclassed Harvard. From janitor to scholar within days, Amira Thompson was accepted as a full-time student. Her tuition was fully covered. Her living expenses were paid. And though she no longer needed to mop floors, she chose to continue working part-time. To stay grounded, she said. Word spread quickly around campus. The story of the janitor genius rippled through Harvard's hallowed halls, turning whispers into applause. The story goes viral one day. A student journalist published an article about Maya. By nightfall, it had exploded across the internet. Major news outlets covered her story. Celebrities tweeted about her. Hashtag Maya the Genius trended worldwide. Messages of hope, admiration, and encouragement flooded in from every corner of the globe. People saw in Maya a reflection of their own dreams, the ones they'd shelved, the ones they'd nearly given up on. Maya became more than a student. She became a symbol, proof that genius could be found anywhere, even in the humblest of uniforms. A future rewritten today. Amira Thompson isn't just a name whispered around Harvard. She's a renowned mathematician, a TED speaker, an advocate for underprivileged youth who dare to dream against all odds. She travels the world, delivering lectures, inspiring thousands. And whenever someone asks about her journey, she smiles and says, "It all began at 2 a.m., with a mop in one hand and a dream in the other." Would you also like me to help create a dramatic intro line and title card for this if you're planning to use it for YouTube story? Rocket it would really grab attention right from the first second.